Նորմալը իմոթելա նորմալ լավ։ Ինտերակտիվ է լինելու հարց ու պատասխան։ Լավ։
Okay, thank you everybody for coming along. It's good to see so many people here. I'm Dr. Simon Clark, the Program Chair of Political Science and International Affairs. So today we welcome Valentina Gevorgian of our own TCPA research group who's going to speak to us. Valentina is a graduate of an alumni of the Political Science and International Affairs program here at AUA. She completed her master's degree in 2011. After that, she worked at the Institute for Polling and Marketing Research here in Yerevan for a short time. And then in February 2012, she became a research assistant at the Turpangian Center for Policy Analysis, which is the research center attached to our political science program here at AUA. She has a range of experience attending conferences in both in Armenia and in countries outside Armenia. She's also published a number of publications in both online journals and in hard copy journals. And some of these articles concern her research. She's been part of doing some research on civil society and NGOs in Armenia for a while now. And so today she's going to talk to us about this issue. So this is part of a study that the TCPA, the Research Centre, has recently completed on Armenian civil society after 20 years of transition. So please welcome Dr. Valentina Gevorgian.
Not doctor yet. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Clark, for your introduction, and thank you all of you for coming, for your interest and for your decision to share your time with us. I'm going to present a study that we at TCPA, the TCPA team, conducted over the course of the last 2 years, since 2002 to 2014, which was finished recently in November. So the study has been, it was funded by the Academic Swiss Caucasus-Net, which is a program, an international program aimed at promoting the social sciences in the region of the South Caucasus. So they operate in Armenia and Georgia. And the research, the whole study was conducted under the leadership of the Assistant Director of our center, Dr. Jenny Paturian, who is unfortunately not with us here today, but who sends her warm regards to us from the other side of the world. And it is my pleasure to have this opportunity to present to you the study in which I participated as a senior in the capacity of a senior researcher. So as you can see from the title, so what we did is we looked at the Armenian civil society, looking at its 2 decades of development, and so still post-feminist, a question mark. So we're attempting to ask to see whether this communist experience is still here or whether it's withering away or not. So after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there was this great enthusiasm for the post-communist countries for the democratic development of these countries, and there were huge hopes that this burgeoning civil society will cement the new democratic achievements. But after a decade after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, it became clear that most of the post-communist countries were on diverging paths in terms of their democratization. And so, for example, the Eastern European countries and the Baltic states, while they were able to consolidate their democratic achievements, some of the post-communist countries appeared to be stuck in transition, with even some of them clearly reverting to authoritarianism. So that after the 10 years of examining a decade after this, looking at the civil society achievements and activities after the decade, in the capacities of countries being independent, it's obvious that the civil societies were not functioning the way they were expected to function. Civil society. What is civil society? We all understand that it is a very complex. It is a very complex and comprehensive phenomenon, and just as an introduction, just as a definition, an important definition, which we used and with which we approach our study with. So this is one of the most popular and widely accepted definitions of the concept. So the sphere of the social activities and organizations that exist outside of the state, the market, and the private sphere, and based on the principles of voluntarism, pluralism, and tolerance. So we all know that Armenia is a post-Soviet country, which means that for nearly about 70 years it has been under gaining independence in 1991. The communist system has placed all the responsibility for police. We conducted, and then so you can see also the corresponding methods applied for each of the levels. As I said, the secondary data analysis, the countrywide level analysis, survey, and interviews. The main concepts, again, that we refer to while analyzing all of these layers, the trust towards NGOs, the membership in organizations, and volunteering, as the basic components that would help us to define this very complex concept of civil society, because when you're dealing with something which is civil society, you definitely need some framework for analysis. So you need to justify, you need to find this mechanisms through which you are going to measure what you are going to measure. And so the main questions with which we looked at our study is so how does it look? Each of the things that I mentioned. What has changed in general, overall? And another important dimension which we looked at, since we're doing this country, the 2 decade, since we're looking at changes, at what has changed as a result of the transition period, whether the young generation is different from the older one. So it's a very important, significant dimension. So a few more words on the methodology that was used, maybe more specifically for you to get into, to understand. So the secondary data, what we did is that some of the most available and the survey data has been analyzed, including the World Value Survey, which you might have heard. It's a very, the World worldwide an important survey which looks at the countrywide and looking at the political culture, the attitudes and behavior of the people. The Caucasus Barometer, very important, one of our favorites, is the Caucasus Barometer is an annual survey conducted by the Caucasus Research Resource Centers, which is another international program that operates in the region of the South Caucasus, covering all the three countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. So annually they provide us, the researchers, with a pool of very good and wide-ranging multiple data, which can be used for various analysis. Life in Transition survey, also another type of the survey, looking at the well-being of people and their attitudes and behaviors. And also all kinds of indexes that refer to the civil society. So, for example, the Civicus provides, as you know, the civil society index. So, this much about secondary data. NGO survey was conducted in Armenia, covering with the NGOs, with a total response rate of 188 NGOs, which has been identified through this Googling technique, which is a totally separate subject of methodology. I'm not going to go very in details on that, but if you're interested, I can show it later. This has been this type of methodology that we used to map the online visibility of NGOs in Armenia. This has been published as a separate methodology paper. And for those of you who are interested in this methodology part, it is online, and we also had a hard copy in the center I can share with you. So primary data, totally fresh, provided by TCPA, at TCPA for those who are interested. And the third, so the interviews were conducted with 20 interviews with the NGO leaders and 10 interviews with volunteers. Purposive sampling was done to maximize the diversity of participants, looking at the age balance, the gender balance, also the settlement type, so not only the capital but also the regions of Armenia were taken into consideration when selecting participants. And importantly, the type of organizational operation. So we know there are a variety of NGOs working in a variety of fields, so this was also taken into consideration. Now, from this point, I'm going to speak about the most relevant or valuable results that we consider it will be valuable to share with you based on each of the methodologies employed. So, some highlights from the secondary data analysis referring to each of the important, this theoretical framework I referred to in the beginning. Membership is still low in post-communist countries, notwithstanding already the second decade of development, so even more. So based on the World Values Survey, which targeted 50 countries for almost 5 years, including, the data is the same. Focusing on Armenia specifically, membership is low and declining. These are the 2 years that the World Values Survey has been conducted also in Armenia. We can see that in 1997 we had 23% members in at least in one, having a membership in at least one organization. Recent data, according to the recent data, it's declining. It has declined to 7%. Trust towards NGOs in Armenia is low, and even worse, it is declining. Some of the good news can be that informal volunteering is on the rise. Looking specifically at the trust I mentioned, trust towards NGOs. Here you can see the slide depicts the data for the 3 countries, the group data for the 3 South Caucasus countries, so it's the Caucasus Barometer. And you can see that Armenia is not, how far we are in terms of our trust toward the civil society organizations, the NGOs specifically, but even worse than that is that the trust is declining. So this is the data for the last 5 years during which the annual survey was conducted. The most recently available data is 2013, so I'm sure there is another one for 2014 also, but it's still not available online, and we're very much awaiting. I wonder if we have CRRC members in the room from CRRC. No? So this is the most available data at the moment, and we can see that trust is how difficult, how far we are even from our neighboring countries in this regard. Usually, the question on trust, whenever it comes to trust towards specific organization, which is NGOs in our case, usually the question succeeds that, okay, but what about some of the other organizations? What about people's trust towards other organizations, which I thought it would be interesting for you to have a look. So, again, according to this is the data only for 2013, the Caucasus Barometer. So the numbers is one is the fully distrust, whereas 5 is fully trust, and these are the average numbers. We can see how low the NGOs are in this institutional trusting in terms of institutional categorization. So some of the highest trusted organizations are religious institutions in Armenia. Excuse me.
What do you mean saying regional institutions?
Religious institutions, I believe it's church. I believe it's church. The army, not surprisingly, educational system, surprisingly, and some other things. But the most sad part is when we look at the bottom, the least, we can see that the 5 least organizations having least trust are the governmental institutions, the court system, and so NGOs. Okay, speaking about volunteering, self-reported volunteering, here is the subject. The volunteering can be considered to be the subject that is more or less provides us with good news. This is the data again. Compared the 3 countries, the group data for the 3 countries, and we can see that here Armenia shows the high levels of volunteering, which can be considered as a positive development if we're looking at civil society and placing the importance of volunteering as an activity within this complex phenomenon. So some of the highlights, again, from the secondary data analysis is that the young generation defined from 18 to 24 years is not more active in terms of formal membership, so no membership rates, again, looking at our framework, theoretical framework, but the young generation is more trustful of NGOs, so compared to older generations. In these terms, looking at the formal membership, we can say, we can have concluded that the communist legacy in these terms, in this regards, is not withering away. Looking at some of our NGO results, the results that the results of the primary data that was conducted by us, by TCPA. So we have included various different types of questions in our questionnaire, so that to have a better understanding of what's happening on different types of dimensions regarding this civil society phenomenon, the NGOs or operation, and all kinds of things that relate to them. So 75% of people, respondents, say that their NGOs have experienced leadership change. Leadership change, approaching this as a positive thing, because when the people when the NGOs have a long history, so we were interested how many times, what is the case, what is the picture regarding their leadership change in their organizations. Not surprisingly, perhaps for Armenia, most NGOs are seen to be run by men, while women have supporting roles. 90% of NGOs are volunteers, again, something that has been confirmed by all kinds of methodologies that were employed for the study. And NGOs overestimate trust towards them as an interesting finding. And let's have a look at this more closely. So this slide depicts the combined data regarding the same question, which is the trust towards NGOs. So you can see the dark one, the brown one is the organizational survey which we conducted at TCPA, so the answers from our survey, while the green light depicts the picture from the Caucasus Barometer recent data, and we allowed ourselves to compare this data because since both of the data was collected in the same year, so you can see that how different it is. So 43% of people who answered the question think that they are somewhat trusted. Yes, and another important thing to remember here is that our question has been answered by the NGO community, so NGO representatives or leaders were filling the questionnaire, while the green one is the public opinion. So this was the data gathered from public. And it clearly depicts that NGOs just overestimated trust. It's clearly different, the opinions. Looking again a little bit at the distinctions and differences between the old versus new NGOs and the leadership change that they have gone through. So older organizations are better institutionalized in terms of, so the leadership change is existent. They have more paid staff. Older organizations, meaning the ones that have been established longer, that have a longer period of existence. And they have more grants per year, also speaking financially. Yes, another dimension we looked at with our survey was the usage of these modern communication tools, which and the finding is that the newly established younger organizations are much more willing and actually using the social media and all kinds of these techniques. Some results and highlights from the qualitative study. When analyzing the history of a country, it is important to address people's perceptions regarding the changes that have occurred as a result of the period which is being considered in the framework of the research. And according to participants, the changes as a result of transition periods are grouped into the following emergent categories. So people think that Armenian public, we Armenians, have undergone psychological changes. Psychological changes in terms of the public becoming more active or interested to know more what is happening around, what is happening with their lives and the people around. And this psychological, transformation in mentality, so mentality transformation, has resulted in the transformation and in the change, in the behavioral change. The behavioral change participants highlight to be, so it's manifested in the active public becoming more active in the activities, the social, being more engaged in the social and political activities, the growing interest, as I mentioned, and also increased volunteering. So these three dimensions are being considered to be the underpinning or factors or aspects that help preserve this, that have led to this behavioral change. The second emergent category regarding the changes is the institutional environment. So the institutional environment has changed as a result of this 2 decades development in terms of the the existence of multi-level NGOs. What it means is that, as some of you may remember, in the beginning of the 90s, right after when the Republic became independent, we're looking at NGOs, looking at the sector. We had a lot of NGOs working on the issues of agriculture, medical issues, the benevolent NGOs. These kind of issues were on the agenda back then. While today there is an unbelievable amount of all kinds of NGOs. According to the most recent data, more than 5,000 registered organizations, by the way, civil society organizations, not only NGOs. NGOs are more than 4,000, while the foundations, other types of things, about 1,000. So today we have this multi-level picture of NGOs existing and progressing in terms of their existence the quantity, definitely not quality. And this has, in its turn, resulted in the competition, which is, if we look at the democratic concepts and all kinds of frameworks, it is a good thing. But it's interesting that on behalf of the participants, it is considered as a not so very good development because they are encountering difficulties, for example, in getting financed. So this increased competition has resulted in this. And also the last category, emergent category as a result of the changes is the technological investment, highlighted many times by over half of participants, which is defined as manifested in increased working productivity and recognition of NGOs. So the modern technologies that were supplied with provide many opportunities to advance the activities of organizations aimed at progress. Speaking of volunteering and youth and looking at this through our qualitative dimension, interestingly, all NGOs have volunteers. All the peoples we spoke with have volunteers at their NGOs. The scale and the number of volunteers differs. The scale of their involvement in their activities, this kind of things differ, but one thing that unites them all is that they all have volunteers. And interestingly, there's something that I thought to share with you is that youth activism is on the rise, and the thing that is being frequently mentioned by the many participants is that they draw this distinction between looking at the younger generation I referred to at the outset, that our current generation is different compared to the youth that was there in the beginning. In terms of, so the distinction is done, the executors versus initiative takers. Executors, so this is a word translated actually from Armenian. I would say the word in Armenian, կատարող, կատարողներ. So this distinction, executors meaning the people, the generation back then was more of an executors. So they were, provided with tasks, and which is something we can definitely relate to the communist experience. Whereas today what we have is we are experiencing of the existence and development of youth with some of the qualities of initiative takers, and it is my pleasure to confirm this fact by pointing to some of the students that we have, the young generation that is here. So this can be definitely considered as a positive development. Speaking of some of the factors that hinder the development of the civil society sector in Armenia, the most popular answers, the top 3 answers mentioned and spoken and heard on the whole course of the conversation is the corruption and centralized government. So this is some of the most frequently mentioned reason and reality, I would say, that is hindering the development of our sector, citizen sector. The oversight mechanisms by the government, the control and oversight mechanisms is also an important factor, meaning the government tries to provide the control, to enact the governmental control through the various mechanisms put in place, whether it be policies or laws, different kinds of things, and the recent draft law on the NGOs can be one of the examples of this. And also the financial instability as a very important factor hindering development that has been around back then and is continuing to be there as a difficulty for the NGOs. Some of the good news, factors of success of the sector, some of the things mentioned, the most frequent things mentioned are the NGO's cooperation with civic activists, an important dimension, and I would say even a very recent dimension in terms of this is an area which is on the rise, and I'm going to speak about it later. International networking, civil society organizations rank high these opportunities to to be working with international organizations, to be included with various international frameworks, forums, which definitely contribute to this, to their progress through exchange of information and increase in cooperation, and also recognition of NGOs as an important factor, again referring and linking to this institutional development highlight. Trust towards NGOs based on the qualitative findings of our study. The NGO sector is not trusted in our country. Why? The three most importantly highlighted reasons are that, again, the governmental policies, which do not allow, do not provide a specific, exactly open space for NGOs to become trusted. So the existence of GONGOs, which is the governmentally organized NGOs, which existence spread this negative image on the sector as a whole, and also on these NGOs, on those NGOs who in reality maybe exist and they really are there for doing something good, but because of this increased existence and operation of GONGOs, this negative image is also automatically spread on them. And interestingly, the mentality issue has been highlighted many times throughout the conversations, that so people think that besides from all the things, all the difficulties that we have, some of the things I've already mentioned, mentality tends to be the most important, remains to be an important issue which we need to overcome in order to, there's just no trust towards anything. Some on the good side, on the positive side, so notwithstanding all this difficult and the dark things that are happening, unfortunate things that are happening in the sector, in the political and social life of our country in general, some of the good news are that there are civic activists who work, who are active, whose practice is on the rise, their practice of their activities, their engagement, and youth and civic activists, two things that are interlinked and very much referred to. Since I was preparing the presentation, and we were specifically preparing this qualitative dimension, and we talked about the trust of NGOs, we referred to this subject throughout the study and the presentation, I decided to put a quote, since we're now talking about this qualitative study, to make this more not interactive, but to make it more visible. So I decided to put this quote, which refers to trust towards NGOs, which has been provided by a female NGO leader of an NGO that has almost more than 20 years of operation. It was established in 1994. So she says that there was trust towards NGOs back then, but there was no financial support. Back then, meaning in the beginning of our republic. And today there is support, there is financial support, but there is no trust anymore. I think this is a very, I don't know, I had some arbitrary decision making in this because I chosen the quote specifically that I like a lot, but I think this can clearly actually represent the condition that we are in today regarding our civil society sector. Some of the final reflections, so to summarize the qualitative study. Increased volunteering at NGOs is visible, which is good. There is no lasting communist legacy in terms of values, and the new generation was raised on different values, far from the Soviet practices, which is important to highlight and which is important to test, to have academic evidence, research evidence for that, which our study actually did. Armenian public is characterized by low levels of trust towards the civil society due to the social and political conditions of the country, as to the communist legacy, which has been the hypothesis. Reasons are connected to our current reality, as opposed to the post-communist legacy. So, post-communist legacy is can no more be a reason for our country to say that, oh, that's the case because, you know, it can no longer be a justification, because what we found is a lot of difficulties, and these practices of the post-communist system exists today due to our today's reality. And as I mentioned several times, informal volunteering is outlined as a very good finding on behalf of our team. It seems to be on the rise, which has been confirmed by all the kinds of methodologies that were employed by our study. This was the end of my presentation. I just would like to say that, so we were inspired and for your information, because I believe we have researchers there, inspired by some of our good findings, not the bad findings, but some of the positive findings, we anticipate now are going to conduct the so-called continuation of our study that is going to build upon what we did with this one. And again, Armenian civil society, definitely, not going far from our topic, but looking more specifically at the civic activism dimension and this cooperation of civic activists and NGOs. So this is going to be our overarching goal for this study. What we are going to do is we are going to look at the interaction and perceptions between the civic activists and NGOs and to see how their cooperation, how their mutual engagement, how it does any good to our society. Which is the project that is just started, and we're looking forward to finishing with 2016, which will be as a result, we will have a major 4-year project on the civil society, looking at its various dimensions. And I would say that even proudly, I would like to state that according to the best of our knowledge, there has been no studies on Armenian civil society looking at its 2 decades, analyzing its 2 decades of development. Of course, definitely, there have been a lot of things, a lot of research and studies conducted, but all of them are most of the time characterized by looking at some specific subjects, such as the donor communities, so various layers that fall under this broader phenomenon of civil society. I would like to thank, I was presenting the study to you, but actually it has been conducted with a big team. Well, not too big very much, but the contribution of each of the team members, whose names you can see here, has been invaluable. And also maybe to mention, so yes, this is the final manuscript of our study, which is available online at the TCPA webpage. I have one example is here, but for those of you who are interested more in some specific things that I mentioned, because what I mentioned was a very short summary of a lot of things that we did, so each of the things mentioned, each of them has more deeper consideration. And yes, and the second document is the very short policy brief study, policy brief of the study, which I have here. For those of you interested, you can just take one when the link. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to answer. Yes, thank you.
Okay, questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. Actually, I have 3 questions, but I'm going to be very short. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that they were not acting as they expected to be acting. The NGOs, about NGOs. By whom expecting? By the government, by the people, by the international NGOs, by whom? Okay. The second question, what government policies impact negatively on the NGOs to be trusted? Please, if you have specified it.
Okay.
And the third question, which is the shortest one, did you mention, I didn't get that, did you mention the new law on NGOs as a negative or positive one?
Some of its aspects, I would say, are negative.
But I'm sorry, just a brief comment actually. The OSI NGO itself, I mean, they were praising, at least I actually contributed to this law from the NGO sector. And actually the OSI, which is one of the most criticizing NGOs, I mean, at least during 2 occasions, they praised the government, especially the Ministry of Justice, for cooperating on this law. And many, many things which even I proposed, they included in the new draft, which is not available yet, but I hope it will be available this week, the new draft. So please.
Okay, yeah, I will start from the first question. So about the who, by who it was expected. So maybe it was my mistake that there was a misunderstanding. It was not expected for the NGOs, but in the beginning of my presentation, I was speaking about the civil society. So after the breakup of once this communism or the Soviet structure, whatever it was, Soviet empire, collapsed, there was, and this should be natural, people, and I'm definitely referring, whatever I say, I refer to the literature, existing literature, academic literature in the first place, because, well, first of all, the most important thing I forgot to mention is that this is an academic study. So first and foremost, we have a policy brief here, but this is an academic study, which we try to find ways to develop into the policy brief, because the most overarching aim has been, it is its academic nature and contributing to the literature. So, yes, back to your question.
The second one?
It was, no, the first one. Don't you think it's, so again, who, the literature, so it is expected to be, it was expected that now when this communist system is gone, hopefully the countries, when they are already on their own, they will be able to develop some of the democratic practices and not going back to the, authoritarian, which actually, or dictatorial, however you want to call the Soviet system, would be right. So this was some, to me, if you ask me, and personally, I would say that was a natural. And the surprise is not in the way that countries did not take this course of development of democratic. I would say the surprise is that they got back, some of them, to reverting to authoritarianism. I mean, if we can look at some of the Central Asian post-communist countries. So as opposed to, why not look at the Eastern European examples, at the Baltic states? And what they did is they got rid of this past, and they are, I'm sorry, but they're progressing through this.
Yeah, but we don't have the startup ready.
That's another question. That's another question. But that's what I referred to in my speech. It is just the general, this approach, general understanding of what was it. It was expected, definitely, because people, well, we all want, and we subconsciously even, we expect us to live and to create, to establish a democratic society. This, your second question referred to...
What are the specific government policies which have negatively on the overall?
Policies, okay. Specific policies, I would say the oversight mechanisms, and this also links to your question on the draft law. Okay. So that, in other words, it's a mechanism that would control, not control, but yes, in a sense, it will control the NGOs.
Negatively impacts to the openness? Because you mentioned that, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that the previous slide, I believe, yeah, distrust.
Yes, distrust. Yeah, I will explain. Yeah. Of course. So people think that how the governmental policies contribute. This is your question, to the distrust. Gongos in themselves, they can be considered as a policy. Don't you think so? No, you don't think so? Okay, no, but I'm presenting the data that we have. Maybe you can be in.
It's arguable. I mean, it's really arguable. Why?
You definitely. That's why we are here. We need to argue. So that this is just a fine. Yes, just let me very shortly respond again. Okay. So the existence of gongos. The idea is that the spread of these gongos, and not only gongos, but we have, as I mentioned, we have more than 5,000 civil society organizations. And do you know how really are active? Not even active, but how are really exist and operate? Up to 20%, and this is a good news. 20% is very, very good result, I would say, good mention, not to decrease the level. So, so the NGO representatives, and these questions were discussed with the NGO representatives. So they think that this is harmful, and this contributes to the distrust, because public thinks that, oh, okay, whatever is being done is done by Dongo, and even my organization, which is, let's say, out there for the good, for the public knowing and seeing some of the activities, following some of the activities of Congos and knowing what they are there for, do not trust us as ultimately. So this is the idea.
Talking about actually.
Yes. Okay. Very good. And sorry, and the last.
The third you answered previously. Actually.
Previously. Okay. Very good.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Thank you very much. I have some questions, but I don't know what can I ask. Then,
You can
for
try.
example, at the beginning you mentioned that democracy. So now that the civil society is connected with the democracy, but the question is how our society knows about democracy, for example. Is the first question. Do we understand democracy? The second question. I know that the NGOs in the Western society's mentality is about, for example, individuals. Yeah? Do you think that we are society for individuals or we are a community? I think that I'm a specialist in Armenian history. I'm sure that we are a community. It's a community. Yeah? Just Armenia is a community. We don't think like I think. We just can say that I think. We just looking at the sayings of the others. What does our neighbor think about me?
Sorry, a question here. So are you referring again to this mentality thing?
Yeah, this is mentality, because we are not individuals. We think like the others, not as individual, for example.
Okay, but what is your argument?
We look at the thinking of the others. So do you think
we cannot develop any of the democratic society in this term?
Yeah, because we are a community. We think as a community, not as the religions, but a community. You know, that in society is
excuse me, what is your name?
Ale.
Okay, that was your question?
Yeah, and then and there is also a question.
Okay.
For example, I don't see, for example, the cooperation between Armenians, the United States NGOs, European NGOs. Do you see such cooperation?
Did you not see it in the study, you mean?
No, not study. We need in cooperation, yeah? We need in learning of something from Western society. Because we don't know sometimes many things. For example, we need in cooperation with the others. Do you see this cooperation?
Okay, let me just start with yours.
I don't have last question. Always those grants are being given to the older organizations. You mentioned about the older, because they are in situation of good situation, let me say, and they are high organized and well organized organizations. Every time they are being paid much more than the other organizations. It's very amazing. It's very surprising. So explain to us.
Okay, let me try. So, okay, I'll start. I will be chronologically ethical in answering your questions. I will start from the first one. Democracy. So, how do we know what is democracy? That was your question.
Do we know about democracy?
Do we know about democracy?
I'm not sure. It's not connected with communist society.
Okay, let's answer your question. You asked your question.
Okay, the civil society, this topic, and in general, being there as a researcher, I would say, well, first of all, you were right mentioning that civil society is an important, this is what you said, right? Civil society is an important factor that contributes to democratic participation, whatever, and this is something renowned throughout the world. That's for sure. How we know what is democracy, as a researcher, as someone who also presented the findings, some of the good findings related to our current new generation, which is being raised on some new values, I would say that I do not see any other way but looking, searching, and in the end finding this democracy. Because if we see that, what you said, there is a lot of truth in what you say in terms of our values, the societal values, mentality, and so on, but so what? So do we have to wait and sit and say, this is our reality, this is our mentality? I agree. Saying this, I agree what you say. There is a lot of difficulties in various levels, in different types of arrangements regarding this very phenomenon of the civil society. But what we try to do is, the least we can do is definitely to try to contribute to understanding maybe. You are also, I believe, referring to this lack of civic discourse, which is almost non-existent in our country, and which is very bad. And how to know, how to arrive at it, it's develop this discourse. That would be the only way. I'm not here to question whether we have democracy, we don't have democracy. It would be very, very perhaps unprofessional, very arbitrary opinions. I don't want to be making those. But what I can confidently state, in my personal opinion, is that we need to, if you think we don't have it and we don't know it, then we have to look for it. But whether you think we need it at all or not, this is a totally different question, and I would definitely argue with you on that if that was the question. So that would be my question regarding the democracy. I don't see any other option. So as a researcher, as a representative of the community where I work, and someone who is very proud to have had the education which I got, because that is education would be my answer. One of this, definitely, because it enlarges your scope.
Then the first step should be the education. Next step, the member of the NGO.
The civic discourse that I mentioned
is
definitely linked to the education. So very briefly, so the second question was about community, whether we have a community society, individual society. Since you are a historian, you would definitely know better than I in what type of a society we are in these terms, historical terms perhaps, but individual dimensions, this pluralism, diversity, and becoming an individual society, I would say, where interests and values of each of the members in the society is valued, should be the aim. Should be our aim. So whether, okay. And yes, the last question regarding cooperation, I would give a very brief answer. The European Union USAID cooperation, I don't know if you know, but what we have is the European Union's Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, if you heard. So this is a non-governmental initiative established by the European Union, which brings together the NGOs, the civil society organizations, its various kinds, into one framework, into the one pool of, into one room where they cooperate, being the third important part, representation in this triangle, having the European Union on the white side, our national governments of the Eastern Partnership countries, and civil society. So there is some kind of a cooperation, and I would say another question is, what does this cooperation bring? And what is its impact? What is its influence? Is the other question. But the cooperation, funding, all kinds of going. And in the morning, I've been present during the Euro Parliamentary Assembly, which gathers the civil society session. So a lot of people from various countries. The cooperation exists. The things are happening, but what is their influence, I think is something where we should definitely look. Thank you for your questions. Yes.
Okay, actually, I'm first and then the back.
Thank you. I wonder whether the study has looked at the attitude of NGOs towards each other.
Attitudes of NGOs, so in which terms? I
Like
think
the reception of each other.
Perception. Now that I can very clearly remember, because even if we have it only on a very minor level, but what I would refer to perhaps is this reference to the competition, which is out there because of that. So CSOs are very happy that there are also other CSOs which work on their issues, but on the other hand, they are not very happy because it leads to some sort of a competition which results in the decrease in their access to the financial resources. So I think that would be
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Bunyasin.
So, thank you very much for the presentation. If you allow me a short comment, I think that with this question of democracy, all societies struggle with cooperative frameworks and hierarchical frameworks, and that maybe we have had experience with hierarchy, and that's not democratic, specifically democratic, but we've also had instances of great community cooperation. If we look at the independence movement, it was the first independence movement in the post-Soviet space, was in Armenia. It emerged from an environmental movement, it emerged from a reunification movement, and even before that we had a movement in the 60s. I mean, how do we have this in America? But people in the 60s and in the middle of the Soviet Union created a community movement. So we have that experience, and it goes back and forth. So we have the foundations. All societies have these foundations. The question is, which of those competitive versus cooperative frameworks emerge stronger at any one time? I want to say things are not static. Everything is always developing and changing. And my question is regard to one of the hindrances regarding financial instability. I just reviewed a paper where one of the points made in the paper was that in other countries, NGOs have suffered, especially service-providing NGOs, because international donors have been weakened by the global economic crisis. So 2008-2009 global economic crisis cut into the finances of donor organizations. And I was wondering, when you cite financial instability as a hindrance to further development of NGO sphere or civil society sector, are you considering that, or were you considering instability in Armenia itself, or the international impact on the local environment, or in what context?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for your first comment, Dr. Bunyasin. That is of utmost importance, and definitely we should always, whenever an Armenian or a study on Armenia and the civil society refers to anything like that, in the context of civil society, it's definitely important to remember some of the greatest achievements and movements that we had, as opposed to maybe, I would say, some of the other countries' experiences. So thank you very much for reminding us. This definitely I should take into consideration, including maybe this kind of an introduction to the beginning of our presentation. Regarding the financial stability thing, these answers refer totally and completely to the society sector. So the financial instability was recognized, referring with a reference to NGOs and their operations. Yes, it's true, the donor-driven, there is this literature, and even it was in 2004 study conducted by USAID, the whole sector actually was described as donor-driven, as you might also remember. So that's true. But instability in these terms refers to the NGOs. And again, so what is highlighted most of the times is that they are done, the grants are available, but maybe again, back to this competition, it's not very much easy to get involved. And also another thing I would mention is also this instability is related directly to the maintenance of organizational operations. So in other words, if there is no grants, the NGOs do not have salaries. So this is a very, very important issue for the sector, as opposed to some of the other organizations who can allow themselves working, maybe due to some funds that they have already established, and grants are just things when it can come and go, and no matter what, they are financially sustainable. This is this is an existing challenge and problem for Armenian NGO sector. Yes.
First, I'd like to react to the gentleman regarding the negative impact of oversight by the government on the NGO activities.
Non-regulations.
I would say oversight. I mean the new draft law on NGOs. Because first, it is extra spending, because sometimes audit is needed. Secondly, it is extra interference, or the risk of extra interference towards the NGO activities by taxation office. And theoretically, it can be considered as okay, or what negative impact, but in reality, in Armenian reality, we see that interference of tax office in any activity, it brings to the extra pressure from the government to that institution. So,
may I reply to this? Actually, by this new law, no, okay.
okay.
No, I just want to say something. I hope you look at the U.S. laws on nonprofit organizations, and you will see how tight they are. This field is much more liberal than the U.S. field. And in terms of checks and balances, I tell you, I've worked in the nonprofit system for a long time, and I know it's much tighter than what is. The Armenian law needs to get tighter.
Sorry, first I indicated the differences between the democratic systems of Armenia and USA, so sorry for that.
In fact, this is the first time NGOs will be allowed to conduct commercial activities by this new law.
Okay.
There was no precedent.
Excuse me, what is your name?
My name is Gabriel Bala, and I'm teaching Intro to Armenian
Okay,
here.
very good. Gabriel, no, my question is, but what about this dimension that because this is a question to you since you are definitely a better expert than I am in this specific field now. No, but what is about that the gentleman also referred to in terms of this financial oversight provision? So, okay, this that they will be able to provide their service delivery?
You know, there is an interconnection. Since they will
just we need your...
Since they will be able to conduct their own commercial activities,
and
in order to gain profit for their activities, it is supposed that taxation oversight should be tougher.
Okay. Now,
so this is, the Ministry of Justice, this one my proposal as well. Like, for example, when they first put these 10 million for the audit, I said, why you don't put 1 million or just $500,000?
Okay.
So they just lift it up onto 15 million now.
Okay, so the last question here, but will this law also apply to those organizations who do not do any service delivery?
You know, it depends. The law precisely, this was one of the questions the very OSI NGO raised. I mean, this law, the current law, doesn't answer this question actually.
Okay.
There is no specific...
No specific.
Yeah, no specification. Whether they should be inspecting only commercial activities or in general.
Okay, thank you for your question.
Yes.
Yes.
We've got a few
people waiting. Finish after what?
I think we might be wrong. Some people have been waiting for a while.
Oh yeah. Initially, I had a question about this non-formal volunteerism in Armenia, which is a positive finding, as you said. And doesn't that oppose to the gentleman saying that we are a community rather than individuals? Because we can see that in community we don't do much volunteerism, but like informally we do a lot.
That would be a very nice addition to, as a positive addition to the answer of the gentleman in terms of Armenian society becoming more finding ways to become more democratic, whether it be through education, through this increased discourse practices, but this is something that has been confirmed throughout. And even if you look around, you will see that the volunteering practice is definitely on the rise, both self-reported volunteering and also based on the examples that we had in our studies. So the NGOs, so 90% of NGOs that responded to our survey, they had volunteers. This should be something. Thank you. Yes.
If you would allow me to make a comment on low distrust towards NGOs, I think one of the reasons is the government-driven propaganda towards some NGOs, for instance, that deal with the minority issues and deal with the equality for the minorities, because this adds too much on the propaganda on this kind of NGOs, and thus people think that all NGOs do the same. So maybe as an addition to what you said.
So what you're saying is lack of propaganda?
No, not lack. No, not lack of propaganda, but government-driven propaganda.
Okay, so I would say that there is a lack then of good propaganda, but now we need to define, we need to change the word, not the propaganda, but the discourse to which I referred earlier, in order to show to indicate the importance of maybe those organizations who actually are there and doing something, as opposed to any kind of other external and interrupting propagandas, whatever it is.
Now, what I mean here is a bit different. I mean here negative propaganda towards some NGOs that deal with, for instance, minority issues like LGBT issues. So the government-driven propaganda, I mean by this, they say they get
That's true.
grants and they're grant eaters and so on and so on. And that has very much negative impact on the society. And so society thinks that all NGOs are like that, which is absolutely not true and which is wrong. And this is the government-driven propaganda as well.
That's true. I agree, and this, I think, issue links directly to what we discussed already in terms of mentality, perhaps, because this is something that a lot of people refer to whenever it comes to the development of this kind of issues in our society, that we are conservative, more patriarchal, if the historians would confirm if I'm right to use that word. Excuse me, Dr. Valian, for using that word.
You don't need
but
the
that's true.
confirmation of historians.
Okay, that's true, I agree. These are some of the problems we're definitely in a definite need of looking at.
You had your turn. I haven't even had a turn.
Okay, yeah.
But why time is very short.
Thank you, very short.
Just as both remark and with the continuation of the issue. So, considering NGOs cooperation with civic activists, which is definitely a positive development, in terms of the lack of trust and the lack of perception of what the NGOs are actually doing, of a proper perception, do you really take into account the factor of the lack of cooperation of the NGOs themselves with the larger groups of societies? So to me, I believe that my impression is that NGOs are more awaiting civic activists to come and to cooperate with them, rather than they go into larger groups of societies trying to, and this has to do with the negative propaganda as well. When you have a negative propaganda, then you have a better, more of an obligation to make it more clear to those who are targeted by that propaganda what you are actually doing. And factors like over-centralization in Yerevan, taking only some mainstream issues, let's say in human rights fields or whatever, working in precisely only one direction of the issues, definitely contributing to vulnerability of people living outside of this active Yerevan lifestyle with civic activists, with debates and everything. And they are becoming really vulnerable to any type of misconceptions and misunderstandings. And it creates a big problem with trust, with understanding what the NGOs are actually doing there and why and for whom. So I think this is a big factor which should actually be really taken into consideration when talking of any type of relationship between society in general, their trust and relationship with the NGOs. So
that's right. Thank you for a very valuable comment. Part of the answers to your questions will be definitely asked in the framework of the study that I mentioned. We have just started, which is the civic activism. Here is where we are going to look more specifically to the perceptions and interaction between the civic activists and NGOs. And this idea, and we came to this as a result of our study, because this was an area that has not been researched by us or looked into by us before. Regarding the detachment, the NGO's detachment from the public, definitely, and you can see it in one of our findings here, that the NGO sector is institutionalized. It is there, but as you mentioned, based on some of the very obvious reasons, it is detached from the public, and there is no cooperation. And this is, I think, a very interesting area to look at very, very, very closely. To look at why is this the case? What is there? Because NGOs are there, things are there happening, but what about the public? And also, because to me, when we say civil society, we refer to the NGO sector, we refer to NGOs, to civic activists, because we as researchers, we need some tangible entities to work with. Because when we say civil society, okay, go measure it. Please go measure it. So how do you measure it? You need a theoretical framework, you need to work with specific groups, defined groups of organizations. While to me, if you ask what is civil society, it's this overwhelmed, it's all kinds of organizations, civil society organizations, not even NGOs. It's the public, it's the citizens, it's everything. It's even the I don't want to include right now, but it's the state in itself. So definitely looking at some of the linkages, this is a very important, this detachment from the public, I think it could be a totally separate issue, subject of research.
Nayeli?
Thank you, Valentina, for the presentation. You stated that as the trust was declining towards the NGOs, and at the same time, the participation or the volunteering is increasing. I was wondering, why would people invest their time and energy in something they don't trust?
This is a good question. I don't think if I showed you, I think this slide has been hidden for some time issues. Yes, let me just show you a very good question. Let me just show you you can see the motivations of volunteers. So this was one of the issues we looked at also. Again, I'm saying this is a very comprehensive study, and if you're interested in some of its specific objects, I would definitely recommend you to have a look at. So motivations, your questions goes to the motivations of volunteer. Interestingly, yes, it is on the rise, but on the other hand, we have no trust, we don't trust. How this can be explained? Let me be honest in saying that we did not we didn't aim at specifically explaining this linkage, so I don't have any data to support this specific linkage, but what we can maybe conclude so a logical explanation can be that most of the time our young people, they volunteer for something, they volunteer for their own games, which is, for example, and here you can see the most frequently mentioned answers on the motivations of volunteers, which is to get knowledge and skills through doing something, through being engaged in an NGO, in any activity, and also a work experience, to get a work experience, a very good, very important reason, which, by the way, has been confirmed also by the leaders of NGOs, who say that, yes, most of the time there are a lot of volunteers, they come but they specifically come for this resume reasons, to put this can be one of the explanations, but definitely not 100%, because as I said, we didn't look into this linkage, but that's an interesting question. Thank you.
I was just going to comment on, it seems the perspective of the overall research is Armenia from a post-communist viewpoint. But perhaps, Armenia has a long history. Perhaps we should also consider post-Ottoman, 600 years of rule, mention post-Iranian Persian rule. So it's not just a post-communist perspective on Armenia, but rather, a more holistic, cultural perspective. There's an interesting, popular book, Why Nations Fail, for example, that comments on that, inclusive versus exclusive cultures. So, I am Republican Party of Armenia, and I don't want any other, political parties in my country, for example. So you've got exclusive culture versus, inclusive.
Okay, thank you for the comment. This is interesting, very valuable. What we did with our study, that's true. That can be the condition of any country can be analyzed to take into consideration all of its history, but we don't want to go back some 500 years ago and 2,000 years ago finding linkages. But what we did actually is we looked, as I represented at the outset, the theoretical framework, which we took the literature on the post-communist civil societies, which says that this weakness is an outcome, is a result specifically of this post-communist legacy, which, as I understand, is the most closest one to us, because right before gaining independence, we have not been in the Ottoman or any other structure. We've been in the Soviet structure. So specifically looking at this Soviet legacy from, but that's interesting. Thank you.
I would die if I didn't have a question. If you go back to the principles, the first slide, I believe, I had a problem with the word tolerance. And it almost stood out as an oxymoron to me. I think it needs to be explained. If you volunteerism, pluralism, and tolerance towards what? But more, I have a problem with the research methodology. Not particularly your method, because I think you've done more like an opinion poll. I have a problem with the sampling strategy for PSIF. 186, if I remember, over a total of over 3,000 NGOs. Purposive raises a lot of validity issues and makes really, from an academic perspective, generalizability very true. And you make a lot of generalizations which, if I were to question from an academic perspective, I would have a series of issues to raise. All right? So I think we need to be a little more careful, particularly when you come to popular issues such as trust. Trust is a very popular issue. And with a very small sample like that, I am very leery about the conclusion we draw. Besides, if you're looking at trust towards NGOs, I think you need to somehow refer to the history of NGOs in Armenia. If I remember correctly, it was the most corrupt sector in this country. And that's what really made trust go from probably nothing to zero. I mean, it was so bad. NGOs were created to get grants. Created, not with a purpose to get grants. And this is something that your questionnaire needs to explore before we make generalizations such as we do. But excellent work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Badian. Your comments are valuable, always, permanently, and forever. Thank you. Definitely take them into consideration. I will try to respond to some of the remarks that you made. So regarding the tolerance, this is a definition of the civil society most widely accepted and popular. So I'm in no way, I wish I could contribute to the development of the definition of the civil society, but I'm too of a small person so far. So this is what we actually took for our study, to be applied for our study. Tolerance, in my understanding, goes back to the comment that the gentleman made regarding some of the issues that were not tolerated, right? Can be considered definitely from this perspective. Regarding the samplings and methodologies, so let me start from the qualitative. Okay, so we've done 30 interviews And from the qualitative study, I know it's the proposed sampling. It can be. I would say that we did our best to include people from these four dimensions that I mentioned, meaning the age balance, gender balance, settlement type, and the sector of organizational operation. But what I also remember from the qualitative study, one of the important aspects is not about the quantity, but the quality. It's not about how many you interview, but it's about who you interview. And with these 30 people, we try to do our best to have a representation, more or less both older NES and also older NGOs, new NGOs. This was also taken into account. Regarding the quantitative survey, actually, correct, Dr. Badial, what we did at the first...
188, sorry, I said 188.
188 response rate, here's... it was, okay, so let me just very clearly refer to this Googling technique. So what we did is first we got this nominal list of the registered NGOs at that moment, which were 3,552. So according to the 2012, when we just started our study. And what we did, so we were not able to get any contact information of these organizations from the state register because information on each organization requires a certain amount of fee to be paid, which was unreasonable and undoable in terms of having a lot of organizations. So this had led us to develop a methodology on actually mapping and finding NGOs and their contact information in order to contact them and then ask them to participate in our study. So what we did is we did this Googling technique, which is, as I said, a totally separate publication, a methodology, academic methodology publication, by the way, in the Haigazian University Press. I don't know if you read. It's available also online. You can have a look. What we did is each of the team members were Googling, simply, very, very merely, Googling the names of the organizations using various techniques, meaning the languages, the Facebook continuation. It's explained in details. And out of this, through this Googling technique, we were able to get the source, the database of the contact information of these organizations, and only then we contacted them. And only 188 replied. Also, this technique has been followed by phone interviews, so not only online but also phone interviews. So this was a technique that we came up with in order to, because otherwise, okay, right? How, if you don't have any contact information, how you approach organizations. So yeah, this is what we did. And
okay, yes, we just have time for another question.
Okay. So also I have a question on the definition of civil society. So as long as I always understood, the civil society is the third sector. First we have the state, we have the market, and then the civil society. But what there in your definition is exclusively liberal definition. So only the liberal part of civil society is considered civil society in this research. So if you look at, see like the recent thing, the Pegida, the patriotic European for anti-Islamization of Europe, they are civil society. We have some extremist groups, they are also civil society. But that is not considered civil society here. There are also some other issues, like we have like the ranking about the religious organization. It could also be civil societies. Like in some society, I'm not sure about Armenia, like in Islamic countries, the religious institutions, they carry out most of the humanitarian and social welfare work. And that's the important part of the civil society. The later, what you said, the trust and the activity of society is decreasing, but maybe it means Armenia becoming a more stable country. So in most societies, the most functions are not carried out by the civil society. The market will support most of the service and the product that should be supported by the market, and the state will have their own functions. And maybe why there was so much, I would say, like a booming of civil society in the 90s, probably because of the war, the earthquake in Armenia. But later, when the country started to get on its own feet, the importance of this kind of NGOs are decreasing. So it's something normal rather than something extraordinary or surprising. Also, at the same time, that was a general trend in the post-Soviet countries. Is the religious institutions are becoming more and more popular. So also probably this possibility, I'm not sure what's really happening here. Probably also the church is taking over some of the humanitarian or social welfare work that was done by the NGOs in the 90s or early 2000s.
Well, thank you for your comment, but I think you've touched upon a variety of issues which I won't be physically able to comment on, but I would, so some of the things that I could read is, so yes, I agree that there are some of the things or responsibilities that are not up to civil society to consider. That's true, but this is not so that the market should provide some of the activities, but this has been an aim of our study. This has been an area which we looked at. Definitely some other groups are also representatives of civil society, agree on that, but again, what we did, I would just say that this concept, it's so comprehensive, it's so complex a phenomenon. Again, coming back to the importance of defining what you want to measure, defining what you want to do with, defining the thing which you are going to employ later, or research later. And what we did with our study, we concentrated on these organizations, as I mentioned, on NGOs, taking them as a tangible entities which will be applicable to research.
Okay, I think we're out of time there. We're going to stop there. Please join me in thanking our speaker.
Thank you.